I'm so disappointed in NATO because this was a test for NATO. This was a test. You can help us. You don't have to, but if you don't have, if you don't do that, we're going to remember. Just remember this in a number of months from now. Remember my statements.
There's been a good deal of pressure on me to change my position in relation to joining the war, and I'm not going to change my position on the war. So whatever the pressure, whatever the noise, I'm the British Prime Minister, and I have to act in our national interests.
Oh, what is it like to live in a country where your government looks out for your national interests as opposed to the interests of a foreign country like the United States does with Israel? But nonetheless, despite pretending like the United States has effectively won and defeated Iran, the president is absolutely furious with our NATO allies for refusing to get involved in the war to help the United States. In fact, the UK, Spain, and Italy have, in different degrees, essentially refused to take part and even banned the United States from using military bases or even their airspace for military missions. And we're going to get to the minor details of that later. But first, I want to talk a little bit about, the important thing to know, which is that Trump is threatening to pull the United States out of NATO yet again. And the way that our allies are reacting to it further, I think, shows that this war could really degrade US standing in the international scene, okay? They could further isolate our country from longstanding allies. Now, look, I've got some issues with NATO. We don't need to get into that right now, but for the purposes of this discussion, going after NATO because our NATO allies refuse to engage in this war is insane and ridiculous. So Trump was asked by the Telegraph, which is a UK publication, if he would reconsider US involvement in NATO as a result of all of this. And here's what he said. Oh yes, I would say it's beyond reconsideration. I was never swayed by NATO. I always knew they were a paper tiger. We kind of look like a paper tiger right now, Trump, on the international scene. But anyway, I'll continue. And Putin knows that too. By the way, beyond not being there, it was actually hard to believe. And I didn't do a big sale. I just said, hey, I didn't insist too much. I just think it should be automatic, meaning these NATO countries should automatically feel obligated to engage in this war. But here's the problem. Why would it be automatic? Because Iran never attacked a NATO ally. The whole point of the NATO agreement is that if one of the countries within NATO gets attacked, the other NATO countries go to war against the attacker. Okay, Iran never attacked a NATO country. And the Trump administration never consulted with or advised our NATO allies that he was planning to launch a war against Iran. So what are we even talking about here? And again, just to be clear, when it comes to NATO, NATO's Article 5 does commit it to collective defense. An attack against one member is deemed to be an attack against all, but invoking this principle requires a consensus. And the 1949 treaty only referred to crises in Europe and North America. Article 5 has only been triggered once in the wake of the September 11th attacks on the United States in 2001. But regardless, Trump did double down on his threats against NATO in yet another interview. This one was with Reuters. Here's what he told them. They, meaning NATO, haven't been friends when we needed them. We've never asked them for much. It's a one-way street. Okay, look, Trump was right when it came to NATO not fulfilling its obligations when it comes to their own investments and their own militaries. Okay, he was right about that. He's wrong about this though. Because when we needed NATO allies to help us in 2001, they did help us. In this case, this war has nothing to do with the NATO agreement at all, not even a little bit. He also demanded that our allies build up delayed courage, go to the Strait of Hormuz, and just take it. You know what'll happen if they do that? The same thing that just recently happened. I think it was a Qatari oil tanker that got attacked by Iran. They're not going to do this. Besides which, there's a big problem right now with insuring those tankers. because the insurance companies are like, no, it's too much of a risk. We're not going to insure this. So sorry. Just a total disaster. So in NATO, Trump has specifically targeted his anger at the UK, Spain, and Italy. So Spain announced on Monday that they would not authorize, by the way, Spain is totally killing it, like in a good way. They announced that they would not authorize the United States to use its airspace for US planes conducting military missions related to the war against Iran. And yesterday, Italy actually followed suit and denied US bombers from landing in their bases. And so let's go back to the UK real quick, because regarding the UK, they initially did reject Trump's request to allow access to military bases in the region or in their country. However, their government did change course and has allowed the US to use bases for very limited defense action. But that's as far as it goes, according to UK's Prime Minister. Take a look.
It's very important that we're clear. There's been a good deal of pressure on me to change my position in relation to joining the war, and I'm not going to change my position on the war. So whatever the pressure, whatever the noise, I'm the British Prime Minister and I have to act in our national interests. I should say that on defence and security and intelligence, we're obviously working closely with the US, as we always do. And in relation to the planning on the Strait of Hormuz, of course that involves talking to the Americans as well. So, as I say, whatever the pressure, whatever the noise, my job is, as British Prime Minister, to concentrate on what's in the British national interest. That's what's guided me through this conflict so far. It will continue to guide me as we go forward.
And similar to the UK, Portugal is limiting their involvement pretty significantly. So Portugal has adopted a cautious stance on US use of the air base that they have, granting access under existing bilateral and NATO arrangements while emphasizing it's not a party to the conflict. Lisbon has restricted the authorization to logistical support, including refueling and transit, rather than offensive operations, framing the move as consistent with domestic law and international obligations. See, like other countries realize how dumb it is to get involved in a war against Iran. Like, I really wish this didn't happen to begin with, because we do have a real problem, a very real problem when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. So several European leaders, including France, Britain, and the Netherlands, say that their navies would help reopen the waterway and escort tankers if the fighting abates, but not while missiles are flying. The Europeans have settled on a joint refrain. This is not our war, and they're right about that. It isn't their war. If you were expecting our European allies to get involved, you might have wanted to, consult with them prior to launching this war in the first place. But let's get back to Spain and Italy, because they have been very critical of President Donald Trump during this war. So Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez went as far as accusing Trump of starting an illegal war, which I believe is an illegal war. But Italian Prime Minister Meloni specifically hasn't been holding back against Trump and or Israel, by the way. And this has been going on for months now. So let's take a look at what she had to say.
Le minacce diventano sempre più spaventose e si moltiplicano gli interventi unilaterali condotti fuori dal perimetro del diritto internazionale, che dobbiamo collocare anche l'intervento americano e israeliano contro il regime iraniano. Un intervento a cui, lo dico subito a scanso di ogni equivoco, l'Italia non prende parte e non intende prendere parte.
So for our audio listeners, our podcast listeners, I'll read you her quote. She said, quote, "Threats are becoming increasingly frightening, and unilateral interventions outside the perimeter, Jesus, okay. Outside the perimeter of international law are multiplying, including the American and Israeli intervention against the Iranian regime. Any intervention in which, let me say right away to avoid any misunderstanding, Italy is not taking part in and does not intend to take part in." And look, we already know she's not a fan of Israel. She even accused them of crossing a red line in Palestine and massacring civilians. And I agree with her on this. Take a look.
E Israele ha superato quel limite con una guerra su larga scala che sta coinvolgendo oltre misura la popolazione civile palestinese, ed è su questo limite che lo Stato ebraico ha finito per infrangere le norme umanitarie, causando una strage tra i civili. Una scelta che l'Italia ha più volte definito inaccettabile, che porterà al nostro voto favorevole su alcune delle sanzioni proposte dalla Commissione europea verso Israele. L'Italia c'è e ci sarà per chiunque sia disposto a lavorare a un piano serio per il rilascio degli ostaggi, un cessate il fuoco permanente, l'esclusione di Hamas da ogni dinamica di governo in Palestina, il graduale ritiro di Israele da Gaza, l'impegno della comunità internazionale nella gestione della fase successiva al cessate il fuoco fino alla realizzazione della prospettiva dei due Stati.
So again, for our audio listeners, she basically called out the mass slaughter of civilians in Gaza, says that Italy is willing to work to secure a return of the hostages. This was obviously before the hostages were returned, willing to engage in, whatever it takes for a ceasefire, but, calling out the humanitarian violations and the war crimes of Israel is something that she was willing to do. And that definitely goes way further than any politician in the US is willing, well, most politicians in the US are willing to do. Certainly our president would never, he wouldn't dare call out the Israeli government and military for carrying out the mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, the mass slaughter of Lebanese residents in southern Lebanon. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on. But getting back to Meloni, the shift away from the United States is a huge turn for Meloni because back in January, because back in January, this was her sarcastic response to journalists asking about distancing from the US.
Sbagliata questa strategia? Allora mi si deve formalizzare l'alternativa, mi si deve dire quindi che cosa si intende fare, cioè dobbiamo prendere distanze nel senso che dobbiamo uscire dalla Nato? Dobbiamo chiudere le basi americane? Dobbiamo rompere i rapporti commerciali? Dobbiamo assaltare i McDonald's? Non lo so. Che dobbiamo fare? Altrimenti, chiaramente.
So I wouldn't even say she's being sarcastic there. Basically, what she's communicating is, well, Trump keeps talking about how he wants to pull out of NATO. So if NATO is dissolved, what do we do for our own security for these European countries? And so the reason why I wanted to show you that video, which was from January, by the way, was because when Trump talks about punishing our allies or alienating the United States from our allies, where our allies start considering other alliances. And I don't know how that's going to work in our favor in the long run, but here we are. And we've seen what Trump said. So we've seen what our allies had to say in response. But is there any actual substance behind Trump's threat to leave NATO? I don't know. I honestly don't know. He's such a wild card and seems very impulsive. But despite Trump's claims that he can withdraw from the United States or withdraw the United States from the alliance, a law passed by Congress in 2023 states the move would require the advice and consent of the Senate or an act of Congress. Then Senator Marco Rubio, now the US Secretary of State, was actually a co-sponsor of that law along with Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, which is an interesting, piece of trivia considering where Marco Rubio is today. But I do want to just say one final thing here. Because while Trump is considering abandoning our international allies or European allies, make no mistake about it, he has certainly abandoned the American people. Just today, he gave a speech, and during that speech, he said the following, and I quote, "We can't take care of daycare. We're a big country. We're fighting wars. It's not possible for us to take care of daycare, Medicaid, Medicare, all these things." And remember earlier this week, I shared a story with you about what House Republicans, or I should say congressional Republicans, are thinking about cutting from the American people in order to provide $200 billion to the Pentagon for this war against Iran. And healthcare is at the top of the list. I'm tired of winning.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. totally not true. But it does keep you updated on our live shows.